Hello everyone, welcome to session 4 of LTEC 676, Social and Ethical Issues in Educational Technology. In this video, we're going to cover 3 topics. First, we'll explore the what and why of equity in education. Then, we'll contemplate the role of technology in relation to educational equity. And we'll end by reviewing some policy recommendations for promoting equity through the lens of educational technology. So let's get started. Thus far, we've been reading Dana Boyd's It's Complicated as a way into our first unit/theme of the course, Technology and Equity in Schools. Of course, as we delve into this topic, we want to constantly be asking ourselves, what should educators know about educational technology? Well, one thing we need to know as educators is the complex history around equality and equity in education. Many of you have probably studied these concepts before. That said, our unique take in LTEC 676 is an emphasis on the role technology plays in impacting equality and equity. Now, I'm sure you've seen a variation of this illustration before. This graphic metaphor is often used to explain the difference between equality and equity. As shown on the left, equality is about sameness. It promotes fairness and justice by giving everyone the same thing. But of course, it can only work if everyone starts from the same place. Equity, on the other hand, is about fairness and inclusion. It's about making sure people get access to the same opportunities. Sometimes our differences and/or our histories can create barriers to participation, so we must first ensure equity before we can ensure equality. To summarize, equality is treating everyone the same. Equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful. Now, you may know that many people have criticized this graphic because of where the initial inequity is located. The graphics show that some people need more support in order to look over the fence because they are shorter, an issue inherent to the people themselves. Of course, that's fine if we're talking about height. But if this is supposed to be a metaphor for other inequities, it becomes problematic. What's really shown here is an opportunity gap, because the problem is not the abilities of the students themselves, but in the disparate opportunities they are afforded. In short, these graphics are problematic because they're an example of deficit thinking, an ideology that blames victims of oppression for their own situation. In this version of the metaphor, we see that some people have more difficulty seeing over the fence than others, not because of an inherent trait or characteristic, but instead because of the context around them. We see here the ground and the fence are uneven. Because of this, equal allocation of the boxes does not result in the same experience. Of course, today our emphasis is on equity in education. And equity in education has 2 dimensions. The first dimension is fairness. Fairness has to do with ensuring that personal and social circumstances are not obstacles to achieving educational potential. Now, a question for all of us to contemplate is, how is technology in and out of schools impacting the fairness dimension of equity in education? The second dimension is inclusion. And inclusion has to do with ensuring a basic minimum standard of education for all members of society. In other words, everyone should be able to read, write, and do basic math, for example. Again, we have to ask ourselves, how is technology in and out of schools impacting the inclusion dimension of equity in education? With that in mind, let's explore the role of technology in educational equity. To start, let's ask ourselves, what and where is technology in general, and educational technology in particular, in this illustrated metaphor? Is technology the ground? Is it the boxes? Is it the fence? Or is it a combination of all 3? What do you think Marx would say? And what do you think Sherry Turkle would say? These are not simple questions. Consider for a moment the use of headphones that were introduced in the 1950s into school language labs. Applying this to our graphic metaphor, we can ask ourselves, are headphones the ground? Are headphones examples of boxes, or are headphones examples of the fence? Keep in mind that what might have been intended by the introduction of headphones into school settings may not be what actually happened. This is the notion of unintended consequences when it comes to technology and our ability to predict its impact. Now consider the Scantron, a technology introduced to automate the grading of multiple choice tests. In the context of educational equity, how might we see Scantrons? Are Scantrons the ground, the boxes, or the fence? Specifically, what impact, intended or otherwise, might Scantrons have had on education equity? To help us contemplate this question, let's take a look at the SAT scores of the Harvard class of 2018. Keep in mind that a perfect score on this standardized test at the time was a 2400. Does this information alter how you feel about the relationship between Scantrons and educational equity? Of course, the relationship between Scantrons and SAT scores is not direct. Scantrons haven't directly impacted this Harvard class's SAT scores. However, you might argue that there is a relationship here. And of course, we can replace Scantrons with any number of other educational technology, such as smartboards or iPads or Chromebooks. And of course, we can replace SAT scores with any other measure of education attainment or achievement or opportunity. Now, I want to close by exploring 10 policy recommendations that have been put forth in order to move society towards greater equity in education. These recommendations fall into 3 domains: design, practices, and resources. The first domain is about designing for fair and inclusive educational equity. We all know that the structure of education systems and the pathways through them can help or hinder equity. Traditionally, education systems have sorted students into different tracks, institutions, and streams according to attainment. This sorting sometimes increases inequalities and inequities. From your point of view, how does technology enhance or hinder our ability to implement these policies? Now, the second domain has to do with fair and inclusive practices. Practices in the classroom affect equity, as do out-of-school practices, particularly relationships between schools, parents, and communities. Student learning benefits from an effective school-home relationship, but children from deprived backgrounds may not benefit if they have weak support at home. Effective provision for migrants and minorities in the education system is also a key challenge for equity. So as we contemplate the recommendations in this domain, we have to ask ourselves, how does technology enhance or hinder our ability to implement these policies? Now, the third and final domain has to do with fair and inclusive resourcing. In many areas of the country, aggregate increases in educational expenditure are hard to justify in terms of their contribution to equity, although they may contribute to economic growth. This highlights the importance of targeting education expenditure, both across education sectors and across regions and institutions, in order to ensure that they contribute to equity. Now take a look at these 3 recommendations within this domain. And as we contemplate them, let's ask ourselves, how does technology enhance or hinder our ability to implement these policies? Now, as a final thought, I want to close by just showcasing some of the various educational technologies that have emerged over the last 100 years or so. We have everything from the introduction to radio, to projectors, to smart boards, computers, and tablets. And the long and short of it is that the relationship between education equity and technology is complicated. and we'll be digging deeper into this relationship more thoroughly in the weeks ahead. That's all we have time for today. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you online.